this first course that I will do, and I will do only one, it's called oyster times 2, power 2, au carré, if we want to translate from the French, which is more accurate mathematically. It's called oyster times 2 because it's an expression of the way I like oyster. Right. The way I like oyster is not very original at all, but it doesn't matter. The way I like oyster, it's very cold with a lot of lemon juice, eventually pepper. It reminds me that if you have a pepper meal, maybe I will put a pepper meal inside of this one, right? So, and I was trying to find a kind of modern interpretation of this, but okay, it's always the same. When you say, I'm going to do a modern interpretation of a dish, you need to be sure that your modern interpretation, specifically when you try to illustrate something as pure and as simple as a beautiful oyster by itself with a lemon juice, you need to be sure that your interpretation don't necessarily top the classic, but at least compete and bring something else and is not an underscore compared to a classic. And that's the most difficult thing to do. So for instance, for this dish, I've been looking, I think it's for over a year, so it's not like I'm looking every night on the same course, right? But we have a lot of course going on together. And I was on the wrong direction, because sometimes things that are obvious, which are just in front of you, you don't see them. And finally, after some time I was trying to fit that interpretation of an oyster, the final idea comes in 5 minutes. I went down in the kitchen, and I did that oyster in 5 minutes, which is extremely rare in what I do. I was in Australia, and I was by myself. I did not have a team. My restaurant was bought again by somebody else 3 times. 3 times I lost my restaurant. And then I wanted to get rid of the constraint of the à la carte to cook at my best. That's the origin of Ultraviolet. Cooking at your best. And because in cooking at your best, you go historically in the context of a table d'hôte, then you can control the time, the offer, which means that suddenly you can trigger the atmosphere around you. And when you trigger this atmosphere, if you play it well, this atmosphere suddenly can play a role in the way you will taste your food. But that's only a consequence. That's a very important consequence, by the way. But this is only a consequence of cooking at one's best. I come back to the oyster. All right, oyster. So a beautiful oyster, preferably a meaty oyster. One of my favorite, one of the most consistent one will be Gilardo number 2. Okay, that's the one we have here. I open those oysters carefully. I remove the meat. I cut the meat in 2 because at the end of the day, this dish will be tasted in 2 bites, and it's very difficult to chew through the oyster. Okay, so they've been done already. They are cut in half. And now I'm going to very lightly season them to strengthen the original idea, which is to try to illustrate my favorite oyster, very cold, with lemon juice. And what I like when I eat an oyster, I don't throw away the first water. You will see some people, some amateur of oysters that will tell you, you open your oyster, you throw away the first water before you taste the oyster on the second one, right? I don't like this. I like to have the full blast of the first juice of the oyster. So here what I've done, I have prepared a foam, which I hope will be working nice. I just did this afternoon. It should be okay. It looks like a Gillette foam. Perfect. All right. So the foam is actually seawater, right? We could say this, except we don't have some clean seawater we could use if we had. In that case, we have done an infusion of seaweed. So it's a little bit complicated. I give the recipe. It doesn't matter. The result is very simple, right? So we go first in cooking some kombu oyster. So we have a water which is this water actually, which is here, which is just a smell of the sea, right? And then we're gonna flavor this seawater with a little bit on the base of a dashi, a Japanese dashi, right? So we're gonna use again some kombu, this time Japanese kombu, unwashed, plus a little bit of bonito flakes, a little bit of smokiness. It's a bit the same story as what I was telling you with the scent, right? We try to mimic the real seawater. And we put some lemon juice inside, a little bit of gelatin to hold the foam, and that's it. We have our seawater foam. Okay? So I'm gonna just season this one. So I add a little bit of caviar. You can do without caviar. We have different versions. It's a bit stupid that caviar is expensive because in that case, it plays a very interesting role. It's just the perfect salt of the sea, right? If you want to sink iodine and you want to do that effect ×2, you need to put everything which is going to be a reduction, a crystallization of the iodine. So I put a little bit of caviar, right? Inside, about 2 grams of caviar. I put a little bit of olive oil, very little olive oil, just on each of them, a couple of drops. I will finish the last one. A very little of soy sauce. It's not because I'm in China. I use soy sauce for a long time. I use soy sauce over salt for a long time, right? It's about the umami-ness of the soy sauce, and especially with meat, but in that case also, it brings up the flavor. It acts as an exhausteur de goût, which I can't even say in English. Well, very little, huh? Just 2 drops, just like this. As you have seen, I dropped the lid of the oyster in the liquid nitrogen, and everything is done. Check that this one is working well. So now, which one is which lid? This one is this one, this one is this one. Okay, so now I'm just going to cover the oyster with the sea foam, just like this. I'm going to take the lid, so you can take it with this one. I take it with this one, don't worry, but if you go fast, it's fine. Okay? Don't do it like this. Don't do this at home, as we say, right? Voilà. That's about it. So now, when this is done, if you're clever, you wear some gloves, especially when there is camera like this, but forget about the gloves. Okay. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. This is the seawater. You can put plain water, but because in case there is some things that still go inside, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I hope, because depending on the climate, it works the same in Switzerland and it works in Shanghai. I forget the seaweeds. Normally we have some seaweeds and some ice because we mimic a little bit the way you are served the oyster in a restaurant, which actually mimic the way the oyster could be in nature, right? So I forget the oyster, forget about the oyster. I find when I was smoking some beautiful little rocks, actually I could leave them here, and something very new, I put some salt on it. I don't believe what is the effect of the salt. It brings somewhere a sense of place. And actually it's all the story of ultraviolet, the sense of place. Voilà. C'est tout. Normally we just present the oyster like this. We send it in the room, actually, to our guest with the little oyster knife, just like this. Hop, ouais, bah, celui-là c'était pas prévu. Ouais, comme ça, okay? We have another bowl, it doesn't matter, okay? And so we bring it to the guest. And I will show you what's the surrounding and why the surrounding, because there's not much else to say. In that case, what I wanted to talk about is designing taste, which I've done for years. But then ultraviolet has opened wide the fact that when you design taste, you can concentrate the idea and try, most importantly, to avoid the idea to escape, get away. Right? So before I talk too much, I want to show you this one. So it's good because when we send the knife like this, you have always the men inside of the room, and they try to show the ladies that they can open an oyster until we show them there is a process, which is like a semi-automatic process to open it. You knock 2 times, right? You drop the guy, the lid, and then you go through in the middle, because I cut the oyster in 2. What I want you eventually to see here, how can I do that? No. Attends, toi. It's the little spoon to eat the oyster. So maybe if we go fast enough, because it's not going to last forever. But what is interesting here is this, right? The oyster is absolutely untouched, but this one has been transformed by the lead at minus 196 degrees with the nitrogen, has been transformed in a very light sorbet because it was a foam just before. So now it's a very light sorbet of seawater with lemon, which is just covering this oyster, and the oyster remains nearly at the same temperature. Voilà. And so you have a concentration of this original idea with a way to eat the oyster integrated, everything inside of it. A lot of freshness, a lot of iodine. That's why we call it, it's a bit like a double oyster. We call it oyster times 2.